Welcome to Responsible AI in Action. As always, I'm your host, Charles Dimov, CMO of Kama AI, the leader in responsible AI technology. For today's episode, we discuss why so many AI deployments are failing and what it actually takes to build AI systems that deliver real value. But this has to be done without wasting resources, displacing people unnecessarily, nor do you want to be burning out the power grid. So to talk to us about this, David Linthicum has been working in AI for many years. He's a globally recognized thought leader in artificial intelligence and cloud computing, a 5-time best-selling author and creator of over 70 courses on LinkedIn Learning. So you would have seen him by now if you're anywhere on the LinkedIn space. He spent a decade at Deloitte Consulting as Chief Cloud Strategy Officer, is founder of Linthicum Research, and is regularly cited as a top 10 global cloud and AI influencer. David, welcome to Responsible AI in Action. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. Appreciate the invite.
So David, let me jump right in, and I'm going to start shooting off a couple of questions to you because we had a really good conversation the other day, and I was absolutely inspired by it because, I mean, you had a lot of really good stuff to say about the industry, and you're a straight shooter, which is awesome. I like that. Straight to the point. So when we spoke last, you had mentioned something about you see somewhere around 80 to 85% of business AI deployments failing. Or rather failing to deliver their expected ROI. Now, that was really interesting because last year, 2025, MIT came out with a study as well, and they were pretty harsh on their study as well. They basically said something like 95% of AI systems which are deployed by enterprises are basically failing. They came straight out and kind of said this, which was amazing, astounding, and a little bit shocking for the industry. Now, given all that, in your view, what's the single biggest reason so many enterprise AI projects are failing, or let's say falling flat at the very least?
There's a lot of reasons, but the prevailing one I see all the time as I'm going out there and trying to fix these things is they're picking the wrong use case. So it's misapplication of AI where it shouldn't be used, and they go ahead and say, well, this is something I think AI is going to be a value to, and they try to basically fit square peg round hole. Talent would be another one. They don't have a lot of smart people in that's doing the architectures, not a lot of trained architectures out there. And also misunderstanding in terms of what value the technology can have. And it seems like every time we rev something that's very hypey, like agentic AI most recently, it's overused, overapplied. I think in many cases, the consulting firms and the AI vendors are out there to blame, a lot of hype behind it. But it's a disaster, I would call it, in terms of things not going right.
Yeah, absolutely. If they're not hitting their ROI, if they're probably not thinking it through before they get started, I would agree with you. I think that's not a good recipe for success, that's for sure. So you also kind of mentioned that you often suggest to executives not to ask, can we use AI here, but should we use AI? And I thought that's a pretty smart question, actually. Now, when we were chatting last time, you said roughly 80% of the systems you review shouldn't have AI anywhere near them, which again, that one really surprised me because I do want you to unpack that one a little bit more for me. And again, that is astounding. So what do you suggest to that enterprise leader? What do you suggest that they should be doing to make that call? How should they make that call?
First thing, be skeptical about this stuff and start asking the questions in terms of how it's going to have value. And by the way, it may have a slight fit in terms of AI being able to bring back value. But as we saw recently with the Uber, situation, they overuse tokens, and the amount of money that they're spending is nowhere near the ROI that's going to be brought back to the company. No one's asking those questions. And also, look for the obvious thing where it's obviously not going to be a fit. So transaction systems like a sales order entry system, people have a tendency to force fit AI on top of that. Well, it may be okay to use it at the edge to do some analysis with the interface and some of the micro data assets, things like that. It's not necessarily going to be successful as something that's going to be core to the system. So we're going to force fit it, but it's not going to bring value back. It's going to be something else, going to eat a lot more money. It's 10 times to 20 times more expensive. We have to keep a lot of expertise around to maintain and tune those models ongoing, or else they're going to be worthless. We have to understand how the data asset is acquired. There's lots of different moving parts in order for you to be successful with AI. And now, if you look at the people who've been doing AI, people like, since the 80s and, a bunch of the other experts out there that are friends of mine, we know this instinctually, but we have all these people who are new to it that are misapplying it, and they're misapplying it because they think they're getting new technology around the use of generative AI. There's some new gizmos in there and some new doohickeys that we're able to use, but basically the rules are still the same. So if it's a system that can be built using deterministic technology, which is about 80% of the systems out there, as you mentioned, it should use traditional technology. It's probabilistic, and there's lots of systems can benefit from that. Broad order, fraud tracking systems, things like that, then use AI. And it's going to have a great deal of value in those kind of scenarios. But it's not necessarily the wide swath of applications that we think we have. And so the whole AI first movement, which all the, CEOs of different technology companies that are, talking about why you need to be an AI first enterprise, it was cloud first 15 years ago. So we need to get a clue on that. Need to get off that. I mean, it's AI sometimes, only when it's going to have a justifiable ROI. And you need to hire smart people that are able to look at these assets. And you got to remember, you're going to be betting the business on this stuff. You're going to end up blowing the majority of your IT assets on things that aren't going to be able to return value. And by doing that, I think many of these companies are going to run themselves off the road.
It is kind of an interesting parallel that you bring up in terms of, we kind of experienced something like this when we were going through the cloud era. Yeah, you're right. That's an interesting observation. So let's think about you brought up cost. So, cost value equation. So two scenarios. One, so you've got two different companies. They build essentially the same system, or AI system that is, but one of them costs about $100 a week to run. The other one costs, I don't know, let's say $100,000 a week to run. How does that happen, first of all? Because, we are seeing, maybe not this exaggerated, but we're seeing some of these kind of crazy exaggerations or sides of the equation already happening in the market right now. So first of all, how does that happen? And the second thing is, what does kind of a responsible AI architecture actually look like in this type of scenario? And does that actually help this, that we don't get these wild fluctuations?
Yeah, I'll take you through it. Obviously, Uber is the best example. They went public. The CTO declared everybody should use tokens. We're going to rate you in the number of tokens you're able to use as whether or not you're a good employee or not. And then suddenly the CIO saw the bill and he said, time. We just blew our entire AI budget in a month and we can't do it. So we're overspending on the technology because people in many instances are hitting a thumbtack with a sledgehammer with many of these large LLM systems out there, these frontier models. We're overusing these things. They're incredibly expensive to build and they're incredibly expensive to run. And right now, the frontier models in, ChatGPT and Grok and all those sorts, they're giving us this technology to use for a very small cost. And so we're even seeing the high cost based on that. So the cost of tokens is pretty big compared to the budgets that we have. And so we're over-engineering and over-solving many of these problems. So many of these AI systems that I see out there, they don't need a large language model. You're able to use a small language model, the tactical deployment of AI that's basically going to solve exactly what the application and the solution needs to solve. It's going to cost you $10 a week, to run the thing, even if you run it in the cloud. Where using a full-blown frontier model, LLM, through whatever provider, they're going to ultimately have to charge you a huge amount of money, and they're going to charge you a huge amount of money now, but it's going to get worse as they try to drive to profitability. We have a bunch of these companies that are going IPO now, and I guarantee you they're going to have the pressure on them from the investors to start making a buck, and they're nowhere near profitability now. So we're putting ourselves in a bad situation. We're making ourselves dependent on a technology that in most cases is only cost justifiable with a very small number of applications and use cases out there. As I teach in my architecture class, LLMs are typically going to be a part of most of the AI systems that we use, but we're abstracting them using only when we need to have wider answers to different problems. So we're going to basically use a minimum viable technology, minimum viable AI model that's going to solve the particular problem. And that's going to do it for the least amount of money, and it's going to bring the most amount of value to the enterprise. That's responsibility that we have to look at, because we're responsible not only for, the carbon emissions and things like that, but taking that out, you're there to satisfy you're there to return shareholder equity. That's what we do as a company. Every time I was a CEO, I was reminding myself of that every day. And by doing that, we have to, in essence, build the minimum viable technology that is going to solve the problem and return the most value back to the business. So if we do that, guys, we can't throw huge amounts of technology at this. You can't go to, the NVIDIA conference and come back and start using massive amounts of tokens on very small tactical problems. And I understand why people want to do that. And I understand you can do it. Okay, here's where we get the can versus should, but you're not going to be able to bring any kind of value back to the business if you make these kind of irresponsible spends, these actions out there. And it seems to be an epidemic now. I see this all the time. I got a call this morning from somebody that, we have a $100,000 AI bill from AWS, and we didn't know where that came from. Well, you look into it, there was no limitations or governance put on people who were leveraging that technology. They overspent and basically blew their budget, in a very short period of time because there was no architectural oversight. Now, you kind of hit the nail on the head. We need to have smart people who understand how to configure and deal with these businesses in a skeptical way when we're looking at this technology. We can't go at this stuff willy-nilly, and we can't use the architectures that we're getting from the consulting firms out there and the technology firms out there. They're designed to really kind of enhance or basically promote change because that's how you're going to get the most amount of money. And so you got to really look at yourself, look at your own issues. You got to hire your own architects. And you got to be very skeptical in terms of what this technology is able to bring. We don't have unlimited piles of money. This is what the CIOs will tell you pretty quickly. And our ability to allocate the money into certain areas that are going to bring the most value, are going to basically enhance the business the most, is where those bets need to be made. And right now, we're frying the entirety of the IT budget and the AI budget in a very short period of time for no ROI.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of funny. As you were kind of saying that, I was thinking, okay, not on the enterprise space necessarily, but certainly as an individual user, as a consumer, I think we're actually kind of probably living in a little bit of a golden era right now, picking up the costs of what the real costs are as a consumer anyway. I mean, you could use some of the models for free, of course, and if you pay for whatever the pro version or something like that, yeah, it's not that expensive, $20, $30 a month or something along those lines. But honestly, it probably is costing the companies an awful lot more to kind of do that, to process all that computing power going on in the background. Funny also thing that you mentioned that reminded me of a story that I heard. There was one of my friends had basically told me that one of their friends, they kind of asked, because we're in the AI industry, so we're kind of saying, well, what do you use AI for? And their friend basically said, oh, yeah, it's a fantastic tool. And she used it as a calculator, to do simple mathematics. And again, it was kind of funny because we laughed and said, wow, what a horrible, a calculator will do it, powered off the solar power off the lights in your room, whereas you're actually generating an awful lot of processing power to just do a simple calculation, which is kind of silly. But again, kind of goes back to what you just said, even at the enterprise space. Now, that's a silly example, but even in the enterprise space, sometimes I think we're not necessarily using our heads in kind of saying, hey, is this the right application? Should we be using it? And in what type of AI should we be using in those applications too?
Yeah, that's the core gist of it. And what your friend did really it's just misapplication of the technology. You could use Google or a calculator to make that happen. And that's a good way to summarize how people are using it in the wild right now. And the reason we're seeing 95% failure, according to MIT, I found 85%, so I'm a little better, is because of that misapplication of technology, not an understanding in terms of what value is going to be generated from using this and not having the question to make it happen. We don't have a lot of architectural discipline when we pick and use this technology. And people always come back to me and tell me the same thing. David, works. I hooked up my agent to an LLM and I understand it's burning 1,000 tokens a minute. And that's the big thing. Using APIs, by the way, that's not the cheap AI people are used for. That's going to be very expensive because it has to remain context as it has a communication, as it has a API communication with the agent or whatever engine's using it. And it's way more than we thought because we're not necessarily understanding the patterns, the problem patterns we're looking to solve and the appropriate use of technology. As I mentioned when we talked last time, I play a game with my AI architecture students as to whether you see it AI or not AI. And we'll read a case study and we'll take it through and we ask a few questions in terms of what are we doing here? What problems are we trying to solve? Okay, initially, what kind of architecture do we think, not necessarily get to the final architecture, is going to be right for this particular problem domain? And it'll get them thinking logically about how you leverage this stuff and basically skeptically about when you want to leverage AI. AI should be something that is a last resort because of the expense. That doesn't mean you don't use it, guys. I'm not saying, we use any kind of technology to solve the issue. But the expense of it is going to be far outside most of the benefits you're going to be able to get back. And right now, we kind of have mass hysteria out there. I went to the, Dell Technology World Conference a couple of weeks ago. I went to, reInvent and all the other cloud conferences. They become agentic and generative AI cheerleading sessions. That's all they are. And people are basically looking to move all of our assets over there as quickly as they can. I understand why they think that, because I'm seeing the same propaganda that they're seeing. But the thing is, no way is that going to happen. And what we're seeing right now, and we're certainly in the last couple of months, I did a video about this, is some pushback on the hype. In other words, many of the CEOs that a couple of years ago and even last year were talking about, move to AI now, make it happen. You're going to fire our employees, yada, yada, yada. All those sorts of things. They're all backing down from that kind of stuff because they realize they're not going to get there. We're not going to get at the scale we need because we don't have enough on the power grid to start building the data center assets. And really, we shouldn't have to do that. At the end of the day, I think the capacity that we actually need to drive some of the AI systems is far less than people think. And so I don't know who's doing these models in terms of the growth of AI and the purpose of that technology, but I don't see a value in growing it that big. And everybody is kind of doing the pragmatic understanding in our head that that's not reality. Reality is going to be something between, this Nirvana AI first enterprise that everybody was painting a couple of years ago. And the reality is that we have to make a budget, we have to spend a certain amount of money, we have to do so in a way that's going to be more profitable for the business.
Yeah. Yeah, I would suspect that once we start seeing the real costs of the AI, compute power, and once that starts getting kind of fed down to companies and fed down to individuals, yeah, you know what? I think that's going to be a bit of a different world, that we're going to kind of come out of our little golden age right now, which is a bit of a bubble. And then we'll start actually using our head a lot more to say, hey, is this the right application for that? Because this is it's not a cheap, and it's certainly not a free resource. Now, I want to kind of go back to something that you mentioned as well, which is you drew a parallel between AI today and our cloud computing world of, I don't know, what was that 2011, let's say,
Yeah,
2011, 12, that time frame. Now, there was a lot of hype at that time. There was a lot of overspending at that time as well. And we're seeing the same type of stuff. So you just kind of mentioned some of those things. And there was a serious course correction in the cloud era. Now, if this, let's call it the AI hangover, hits us around, let's say next year, or maybe 2027 through to 2029. You've kind of predicted this as well. So what does that look like? What does that look like for the enterprise that basically didn't build their system with the right processes? They didn't think about responsible frameworks. They didn't think about governance. They didn't think about accountability. Tell me. I mean, okay, sounds like I've set you up for a disaster theory.
No.
Go for it.
No, it's a great question. And I think at the end of the day, what the cloud and the AI systems are building out technical debt. And the cloud technical debt was typically 2 to 3 times the cost in terms of running these things in the cloud versus running it on-prem. So it was survivable. In other words, didn't want to pay the additional money, but we're okay with throwing money at the problem. The AI stuff is going to be 10 to 20 times. When we get into the operational costs, the number of tokens we're driving, how much dependency we have on remote LLMs that we're paying for the API access to, which is pretty expensive. And then in many cases, we're going to have to shut those down. And I just see that happening based on some of the prototypes that are ending up in a failure. I said, you can't push this forward. You can't throw money at it. You're going to spend 20 times the amount of money to drive a very tactical problem within your company. You're going to run out of money to solve other issues. So we're going to have to hit the reset button and shut this down. Everybody hates to hear that because suddenly you have to admit you failed. No one admit failure in the cloud computing era. We just, moved on and, everybody be quiet. And now that's not necessarily going to be an option. So it's going to be normalization of the expectations and understanding of the technology and how it's supposed to work. I think that's going to be something we're probably going to deal with in 2027, 2028. I'm doing it now. I've been kind of an AI skeptic or an AI pragmatist since the beginning of this whole thing started, but everybody seems to be joining that chorus. In other words, I thought all the time it wasn't going to be something everybody should use. It's overused and overhyped and things like that. I think that's going to be something we figure out in next year and the year after that. However, I don't want to lose sight of the value that this stuff has. And that's a big issue too. So in other words, if we're going to have a hangover, we're going to go, okay, well, yeah, AI didn't work. It failed. It didn't fail. We failed. We failed to use this tool that has amazing amount of power, but comes with additional costs and additional consumption of energy. We didn't use it, to your point, in responsible ways. We didn't think long and hard about how this technology should apply to our business problem domain. If we would have done that, our solutions would have looked very different, and the amount of value that could come back to the business is going to be very different as well. You got to remember, AI is, and don't make, we're having kind of a skeptical conversation, but AI can make a business. It really can become the single force multiplier for a number of businesses to automate their supply chain integration, automate their manufacturing, make things more efficient, make things cheaper, make customer service better, all these sorts of things. There has the potential for the technology. But I think by the time we get to these high value applications, we're going to run out of money because we're building the dumb ones. And so that's my bigger concern. And so we're going to have to basically shut down the dumb ones, build the smart ones that actually have value that we can prove in the business. And many of them are going to take business to the next level. Everybody has FOMO about missing out on AI. And I think you shouldn't have FOMO. You should have fear of, fear of screwing up, because I think that's what everybody's going through right now. Not all companies are, down, with the AI only kind of routine out there, but the many of them are. So much so, we're going to see a huge pushback next year. And I think the, press is going to cover it, and everybody's going to be, I told you so, that kind of stuff. We have to get on the other side of that and move on. Figure out what we did wrong, learn from our mistakes, readjust in terms of how we use the technology, bake AI bake it into the process, bake agentic into the process, move forward, and start building things that are interesting and useful.
I love your prediction on that one, and I completely 100% believe it. I mean, already, I think we're already starting to see some of that reverse course on some of the messaging. I think you and I had talked, that wasn't about a week or two ago. Jeff Bezos had come out and he started, basically critiquing a number of other companies and saying, AI is not at fault when it comes down to job losses and such. So that's interesting. And I want to chat with you a little bit more about that. But I love your idea about being selective. And then frankly, I kind of see it almost like, okay, so we're starting to change the narrative on the AI job loss thing. Probably the next step is going to be changing the narrative on saying, look, AI is a fantastic tool. I mean, you and I love it. I certainly love it. It's the best tool I've ever had. But there are times where it's smart to use it, and there are times where it's not. So anyway, now talking about the job loss stuff, let's dig into that a little bit more as my final question here. We've all heard about it. Lots of different companies are basically blaming AI when they're putting into their annual reports. They're kind of saying, oh, we're downsizing 10,000 people, whatever, big numbers. And it's because of AI. We can be more efficient without it, so we're not going to hire these people, or we're letting them go. That narrative, I think people are opening their eyes and saying, I'm not sure that that's really what's going on here. Now, and you've been pretty direct about this as well, kind of stating that, how many companies are using AI to basically cover the fact that they're cutting their headcount, when it probably wasn't AI to be really blameworthy at this point in time. So I'm going to let you talk to that for a second. Now, whether it's ethically right or wrong, it's happening, right? Whether it's strategically right or wrong, smart or dumb, whatever, it is happening. And we can all kind of attest to that. And we've seen it. Now, tell me more about what your feelings are about how let's say a people first responsible AI deployment would look like. Tell me also about what are your thoughts about this, what's happening in the market right now where AI is getting blamed for every, layoff that seems to be happening. It's like, oh yeah, it's another AI layoff, which I'm not convinced is really the truth. And are there companies out there also that you feel are getting this right? So I know I've kind of thrown a little bit at you with this one.
Yeah, we'll take it one at a time. Yeah, people are using AI as a convenient excuse. And we've done this before. People talk about the downsides and the price of oil and whatever. So whatever, we didn't really fail as a company. So we're laying people off because this other external event took over, and then we're having to react to it. AI is really no different. In fact, it makes them look dumb now. So they've kind of come back from making those assertions. Very few jobs are being lost for AI. I think there is automation of tasks. There's automation and redundancies. We're tweaking the organizations and, dealing with different operating models, things like that, as we're putting AI and other technologies in there. But it's not going to have a very quick reaction on these businesses. Companies really can't turn on a dime. So it's going to take a couple, 3 years before we figure out what kind of impact it's going to have. They are going to make quick tactical decisions to lay people off because they overhired during the pandemic, for example, or people that are overpaid typically, and they're trying to correct that thing now, and it's a convenient excuse to make it happen. But also they're losing sight of the workforce. They're going to have, trouble trying to figure out where to, take their business going forward. It's going to be hard to, hire employees. My guidance to people I'm mentoring, and they got laid off in many cases because they were told AI, and they tried to rehire them the month after. And I told them, don't go back to the company. So if they fired you, they moved on, they don't have faith in you, you're really basically willing to throw you out the door, And I think many organizations are many people are making that decision. You got to remember the job numbers are way better than we originally thought. The jobs report we just got on Friday in the States. And that tells me a couple of things. Number one, we're shifting around positions to basically create new ones as we're eliminating ones that are out there. And normally it's going to be it's going to be a net gain. I think for every position we're eliminating, maybe because we're able to automate it using AI just a bit better, that's probably going to happen next year or the year after that. But we're going to actually generate two positions that are things we didn't do before. The ability to have AI workflow management, your ability of training, your ability to have a cultural transformation, your ability to be a prompt-based developer. We're using AI tactically to build the thing. You're not having it build the whole damn thing. That's always a mess. And all of these sorts of things are changing, but we've gone through this many times before. We went through the automation of use of computers in the 60s. We went through the rise of computers. We went through, the rise of the PC. We went through the rise of mobile computing and all these sorts of things. And we always end up on the other side of it with more jobs, better salaries, better positions. It'll just be a better place to work, or universe to work in. Now, are we going to get people who fall in the cracks? Absolutely. But the thing is, those people, if they're able to shift a little bit and be a little bit more flexible in what they're able to do, they're going to be able to pivot themselves into other jobs. So this gloom and doom thing, we're going to eliminate all these jobs and no one's going to have any work and no one's going to make any money. No way are we going to do that. It's going to move in the opposite direction. I'm very optimistic in terms of making that happen. So we need to think in terms of where this is ultimately going to evolve us into. It's going to evolve us into a place where many of the monotonous tasks that we did are going to be automated using AI. I'm automated lots of them I do my calendar and email, things like that. We're going to have more time. We're going to have more time for ourselves and time for our family if we're able to automate the monotonous tasks. Most of the time I used to spend when I was, working at Deloitte and other jobs that I had was just basically filling out my timesheet, filling out, forms that I needed to fill out for the company and, doing a lot of busy work. That was probably half of what I did. If I'm able to automate that using AI, then I can either use that time for myself or invest that back into the business. So there's lots of good that's going to come out of this. But the thing is, as we make the transition, we need to understand that we have to have people first mentality on this. I always tell people I'm team human, and I'm always going to defer to keeping the humans around for a longer period of time and not necessarily displace them with technology unless we absolutely can make a case that has to be done over time. And even if you do, it's going to be an evolution where we're able to pivot those people and put them into better jobs. Like I said, not everybody's going to benefit from that. Some people are going to fall through the cracks, but that should be for what's first and foremost in this business. One of the problems with the AI industry right now, and also the people who are adopting AI and saying we're going to fire everybody, they're coming off as really kind of subhuman. In other words, there's not a lot of flowers and bunnies that go along with that talk. And you look at some of the pushback that we're having with the data centers right now. That's because the whole industry just totally flubbed the PR. The ability to kind of roll it out and explain what it's able to do, what it's for, and capabilities of it. They said, yeah, this technology is going to fire everybody, and by the way, we're going to take all your power, and by the way, we're going to build ugly boxes, these data centers near your farms, and there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah, they can. They can push back hard. Then lawsuits and things like that. Well, the reason that happened, they didn't explain, they didn't sell, they didn't, pitch, they didn't disseminate the information. They didn't have a heart of a teacher. They had the heart of a salesperson. They just ignored the pushback.
Yeah. That's a good point. That is, and I am totally with you. I do believe as well, very much as you kind of say that. It's been used as a scapegoat, not. The disaster scenarios, again, we all read the stories about it saying, oh, everyone's going to lose their jobs. And of course, that's not going to actually happen. But anyway, good. Well, thank you for kind of discussing that one and taking us into a brighter future as opposed to that doomsday future, which is good. So, David, thank you again also for joining us on this pretty refreshing, candid, and straight shooting discussion about AI deployments, what they really look like today. Now, I like what you were saying about asking, should we use AI rather than just can we use AI? Because that seems to be the mode that we've been in so far. And also starting to ask questions about the true cost of irresponsible architecture, right? And not kind of thinking things through and just almost like a knee-jerk reaction, which again, I would argue a lot has been happening this so far. And so a good number of critical ideas covered today. That was awesome. Really appreciated that. David Linthicum is founder of the Linthicum Research, a top 10 global cloud and AI influencer, and he's the host of Cloud Computing Insider Channel on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, check it out. This also wraps up another episode of Responsible AI in Action. Each conversation with leaders across the AI industry helps to understand enterprise transformations and what's actually working in the field. That's what we're after here. Thank you again to the audience for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you again on the next episode.